This year's Solstice event has almost come and gone, and overall was pretty underwhelming, for me anyway. The memento for this event was questionable, to say the least. The Solstice armor was completely scrapped and reworked to just drop as generic armor for some reason, and the newest weapon to Solstice, a bow, was, in my opinion, a giant waste of time as there are far better options out there. But Solstice did bring one thing this year that it did not have in past years that is worth getting if you can, and that is crowning WARLOCK. And no, I'm not talking about you after a night at Taco Bell. This rocket launcher was in the Solstice event last year, but was a massive disappointment at the time with its perk pool. This year, however, the perk pool has been updated, and it now has a specific combination that'll make it a unique DPS option in the game, and even have some potential down the line with future patches. The unique combination is Bait and Switch with Grave Robber. For those of you that don't know, Grave Robber works in a similar way that Demolitionist does for rocket launchers. You throw your melee, you hit the target, and it'll reload your weapon. The only small downside is, just like Demolitionist, it has a small cooldown between uses, but with this build, that won't be a problem. Let me show you a clip before I explain further. Let me tell you, this man tried so hard to dodge my rocket. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that there are some negatives to this currently. This is a precision frame rocket, which is not the best choice, and there's currently no strand benefits to the artifact. However, as I stated earlier, it has potential down the line. Anyone that's played Destiny for a prolonged amount of time knows Bungie loves shaking up the sandbox and buffing/nerfing certain archetypes, and of course, changing up the artifact mods to give different things a powerful edge each cycle. So while currently this setup is pretty good, it's not the meta best, but it can change in the future, and Solstice won't be around for another year, so you might as well try to get this if you're interested. But back to the video, you may have noticed that despite me holding a whopping 13 rockets total, I only had to reload a few times, and was not utilizing Reconstruction or MS Assassin. This is because of us combining the pure combination of crowning WARLOCK, which has Grave Robber, and putting it alongside a Strand Warlock, which will have benefits in several ways to us here. First, it lets us have 3 powered melees, basically at all times, which means Grave Robber will be live at all times when you need it to be. Now, some of you might say, but Sneak, Prismatic gives you 3 melees, why don't you use that? We'll get to that shortly. Second, since we're on Strand Warlock, we can utilize Thread of Evolution to juice up our Needlestorm super and our Threadling Grenade damage. Lastly, we get to use Apotheosis Veil as our exotic armor and the Thread of Ascent fragment for maximum potential. Thread of Ascent allows us to reload every time we throw our grenade. Essentially, it's a built-in Demolitionist without you actually having to have demo on your weapon. Thanks to us having Ascent and Grave Robber, this now means that both our grenade and melee will both be reloading our rocket launcher, and since we have 2 abilities doing this, they can play off of each other to get around that small cooldown they each have in addition to the small window where we'll be reapplying Bait and Switch for our damage boost. Apotheosis Veil is also a big part thanks to it recharging all of our abilities and letting us recharge multiple grenades and melees before the effect runs out. Now back to the Prismatic question for a second. The main reason why you don't want to run Prismatic is the loss of Ascent and Evolution. This will cut off our bonus damage to Threadlings and your instant rocket reload via grenade, and while Nova Bomb on Prismatic could make up some of the damage with Star Eaters, overall I don't think it would work out the same way it is working out on the Strand version. Now back to the build. Along with the already mentioned Rocket and Apotheosis, your other 2 weapons will consist of any primary that you want that can shoot fast, and then Witherhoard in your kinetic slot for damage over time, plus being an easy source to reapply Bait and Switch in between swaps. In terms of abilities, aside from Threadling Grenades, Thread of Ascent, and Thread of Evolution, your other 2 fragments are Thread of Generation, which generates grenade energy when doing damage, and Thread of Warding, which will give you Woven Mail when picking up an Aura of Power, which is almost a guarantee when you're going into a boss damage phase. Before going over mods, let's get into detail about the rotation of this setup, since it might seem a little overwhelming if you're new to swaps or alternating your shots. The first thing we do in this loop is apply Witherhoard to start for doing tick damage and follow up with our secondary weapon, and then lastly fire a rocket to proc Bait and Switch. The next step is to utilize our abilities to get extra auto reloads from our rocket before we fire off Needlestorm, so we can use 2 ability procs before using up Apotheosis too early. Thus far, your starter rotation should be Witherhoard, Primary, Rocket, Melee, Rocket, Grenade, Rocket. At this point, you can choose to either manually reload first and then fire Needle Storm, or immediately fire Needle Storm and then reload your Rocket. Both work, it's just whatever comes naturally to you, but technically speaking, it's probably better to reload first. After you fired Needle Storm, you are now in ability spam mode, and your next sequence is Rocket, Melee, Rocket, Grenade, Rocket, Reload. After that, you should be out of time with Bait and Switch, and you would need to quickly reapply it. So after the Rocket Reload, switch to Witherhoard and restart the cycle. Witherhoard, Primary, Rocket, Melee, Rocket, Grenade, Rocket. By this point, you'll currently be left with just your Melee and your Rocket, but still have some time on Bait and Switch. So we need to insert a manual reload in between here because, as mentioned, Grave Robber would have a small cooldown. You might be able to get another grade in this towards the end as well, depending on your stats and your mods in the build and how long a boss damage phase lasts as well. Lastly, here are some key mods to run for the build. If you're interested in the full list or the build itself, I will have a dim link below in the description, and while you're down there, you can feel free to just check out the other socials if you want. Anyway, for your helmet, put on a Siphon mod in the event that you're doing solo content and want armor charges for your damage phases. In gloves, heavy-handed for armor charges, impact induction to reduce grenade cooldown, and a strand/harmonic reloader so you reload your rocket faster in those manual reload situations. Boots, put on 3 copies of strand weapon surge, and lastly in the class item, a copy of time dilation to extend the timer of your armor charges. One more thing about the rocket launcher, if you do happen to decide you want to try to farm out before Solstice is gone, while you're doing that, you should also look out for one more perk on this weapon. It's not related to this particular video, but it is a perk that's only on this rocket launcher currently and might be helpful in the future, and that is Deconstruct. This is the only rocket currently in the game, at least at the time of recording this, that has Deconstruct on a rocket launcher, on top of also having things like autoloading, reconstruction, etc. And Deconstruct might be useful against bosses that end up being vehicles. There's this guy called Axis in Wrath of the Machine who's a vehicle. I'm not saying Wrath is coming back, but I'm just saying it's possible that there's bosses in the future that could be a vehicle, and Deconstruct is a 40% damage buff against vehicles, so with the only rocket being Crowning that has it, you might want to just save one, just in case, just a thought. And that concludes the one-of-a-kind DPS build. Now, is it the best thing in the world? No, it's not going to compete with the very, very tippy-top best of the game, but is it still pretty good and fun? Yeah, and like I mentioned, it has potential down the road, but let me know what you guys think. In the meantime, if you did enjoy the video, please consider subscribing today. It does help the channel grow and is much appreciated. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can leave a like and a comment below as well. If you don't know what to leave as a comment, you can leave Taco Bell as the comment. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.